Go ahead.
So today actually marks 1 year since Crimeans held a referendum to join the Russian Federation. I wanted to know if the State Department has taken this occasion to reaffirm its belief that the annexation of Crimea was illegal by Russia, and if you have communicated any messages to them.
Well, that remains our position, and just since you gave me the opportunity, last year the people of Ukraine chose a future based on the values of democracy, free trade, and rule of law. In response, Russia used its military to forcibly seize and occupy Crimea, sovereign Ukrainian territory, and it staged an illegal so-called referendum in a feeble attempt to justify its actions. Over the last year, Russia has instituted repression on a mass scale in Crimea, driving out NGOs and leading non-Russian minorities, including the Crimean Tatars, to flee or go into hiding. This last year, Russia also continued to engage in destabilizing activities in southeastern Ukraine that have left more than 5,800 people dead and displaced at least 1 million more. So certainly our position has not changed in this regard. I'm not sure if all of you, or maybe this is the next question, also saw the documentary that came out this weekend, and it was lengthy, so I'm not sure who watched the entire piece of it. Elliot is nodding. Perhaps you did with popcorn. Saeed did. You know, and if you look at that, related to your question, a year ago, President Putin told the world that Russian military forces were not intervening in Crimea. He now acknowledges to the world that Russian forces did, in fact, intervene, and those are his own words. So it certainly brings into question the credibility of claims being made today that the Russian military is not intervening in eastern Ukraine. Obviously, we've spoken to that countless times from here, as has NATO, as have a number of countries around the world.
And now that you're bringing up the documentary, I have one related to that as well. In that same documentary, Putin also stated that during his incursion into Crimea, he had his nuclear forces on high alert. Just want to know if you have any comment on that.
Well, I think not only that did he acknowledge to the world that Russian forces did in fact intervene, but that they were prepared to take even more aggressive action. Obviously, they didn't do that, so I don't have any particular comment beyond that. But again, I think what we're focused on is where we are now and the question of what's happening in eastern Ukraine and whether there's credibility to the claims.
Prior to the vote, the referendum,
yes,
and then the subsequent annexation, do you believe that the Russian military was occupying Crimea?
Well, I think in his President Putin's own words, they were planning, they were making plans. If I recall the specifics from the documentary, as early as late February.
Right, but one of the points that the Russians have made in the past is that there, of course, were Russian troops in Crimea at Russian bases, that they were, legally there with the permission of the Ukrainian government. So I'm just wondering if you believe that prior to the vote and prior to the annexation, if those Russian troops that were there under an agreement with the Kiev government, if they were occupying.
Sure, I'd have to look back on our information at the time, Matt. Obviously, we spoke pretty early on to concerns about Russians and the engagement of Russian troops and Russian military in eastern Ukraine.
Right, but I mean, unless those forces seized and forcibly seized and occupied, I mean, it just seems to me that if you're saying they forcibly seized and occupied, it would have to be they would have to have done something more than just be there, which is, I mean, they were there legally prior to the annexation.
Well, but I think the question is, where did the equipment, where did the training, where did the materials, where did that all come from?
Are you talking about eastern Ukraine now, not Crimea?
No, but I'm also talking about back then. On Ukraine?